I'm here with Ryan Zellner. Ryan, how are you, man?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you, Peter?
I'm wonderful, wonderful. Can you kind of give the audience, I know you, but they don't. So give a little bit of an overview of who you are.
Yeah, so I'm basically, I taught high school band for about 14 years. I was music department chair for 8 years. During that same time, I'm like, oh, I should get some education and continue. I already had a master's degree in music. So, I was like, oh, I'm going to get some more degrees. So I ended up getting two more master's degrees while I was teaching technology and educational development and strategies. And then I ended up doing a PhD in educational psychology. And then soon after that, I decided I wanted to make more of a difference in the music world. And I started working as the national program director for Little Kids Rock, which is a nonprofit based in Verona, New Jersey. And what we did was provide professional development, curriculum, modern band or popular music training for teachers all around the country. Shortly after that, I went to the Grammy Music Education Coalition, and I was the strategic programs director there. I've also worked in universities, and I spent about 7 months as the head of music education for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So I've had a wide breadth of experiences in the music world and got to see a lot of different sides of education, nonprofit, business, how countries are trying to develop music and what their take is on it, and bring in a lot of different parties and talk to them about music and its impact that it can make on culture as a whole.
I can't wait to get into that discussion because there's so many different avenues in music
Right.
and how it works with learning. But before we do that, what kind of student was Ryan? Like, if you can go back through kind of your K through 12, obviously, I think as we get older, we're a little bit more, we know what we want to do. Obviously, you're going through all your education, but in high school and even middle school, who was Ryan in the classroom?
Bad. I was not that I received bad grades. I just never studied. I never worked. I never did any of those things. I was probably the worst person to have in the classroom because I spent more time in the front of the room. I remember when I was in elementary school, I got to like fourth or fifth grade or whatever it was, and I walk in, and the teacher's like, "I have a special desk for you." I'm like, "This is awesome! I have a special desk," and it was right in front of the classroom, facing the class. So it was literally right next to the teacher's desk. And that lasted for about a week till they realized I had an audience and I could do that. So I was really good in math, and I enjoyed math. So I planned on being a nuclear engineer all the way up through my senior year in high school. And then I had this epiphany of me sitting behind a desk, like crunching numbers and doing that full time. And I was like, I don't want to do this. And I was like, well, how about this music thing? So it was just, I'd like to say in my life, there's been a lot of things that have been planned out, but it really hasn't been that way. It's sort of just taking advantage of opportunities I see and going, oh, that's a great idea, and moving in that direction. And then when I got to college, I got kicked out of a few classes. Didn't really work on that end. I remember I got called into the dean's office my senior year, and I remember him saying that, listen, I mean, it's come to our attention that you don't buy books. And I was like, and he's like, when did this start? And I said, well, I realized I didn't need them in my freshman year, so why spend the money? And if I needed a book, I could borrow from somebody. So I never bought books into that space. And it's not like I was an exceptional student. I just knew enough and could learn enough by sitting in class and doing that. And so I think I really started cracking down once when I got to my master's degree at the University of Connecticut. I had a conversation with the music department chair. I'm really focused on instrumental music. I've been a band guy all my life and been concert band and marching band. I knew what I wanted to do, and I was a graduate assistant there for the marching band and concert bands and pep bands. And the music department chair comes in and she says, "Well, after this class, you're going to be prepared to teach, choral and choral methods and things like that." And I said, "Well, that's not what I want to do." And she goes, "Well, what if that's the only job that's available to you?" I said, "Well, I go work at McDonald's." And that obviously didn't set the correct tone for my next 2 years in graduate school. She ended up putting me on an audit at one point. I had to take her class again. It was an interesting track. My dad always said, your mouth is going to get you in trouble, and that's probably very accurate across the board. But I think that sort of boldness has served me well in a lot of areas about what I do, and I tend to look at music education through those lenses, right? I think I'm not afraid to ask the tough questions to people. I'm not afraid to take a step back and analyze. I try to remove the passion and the emotion out of things and say, what are we trying to accomplish here? What are we trying to do?
And I think that's like the core question right there. That makes a lot of sense when somebody's like, well, what if this is the only path? And well, I know where we're going now because it's not, obviously. Talking about music, and yeah, I think you said before there were two paths that were. What are those two paths in education, music education? What are they traditionally like? They're teaching, and what was the other one?
Performance. So
Performance, yeah.
most programs are set up, and I'm talking about college programs, are set up into this educational path. You're going to go be a teacher of some sort, or you're going to end up in performance. And the challenge with this is that those paths have been set up, 70, 80 years ago in higher ed. And the world has changed a lot, but educators exist in that historical space. And so they teach from what they know. And so many university systems, many outcomes are there. But for example, I'm a trumpet player. And if I want to do trumpet performance, and I want to get one of the, say, a symphony job, a professional playing job in the United States, there might be 3 trumpet openings that come. It's not a market that's a huge market. So what ends up happening as an educator, and the struggle for me when I was teaching high school was what is a successful program? Is it students that are going on to be music majors? Is it the number of students in your program? Is it the quality of the program? Is it what are we trying to do? And what we ended up doing in music a lot of times is going 2 routes of saying like music is for music's sake. So it's like arts, we should do art because it's good and whatever else that you want to throw into that bucket. Or we start diffusing it by saying, well, it's teamwork and it creates like an emotional response. And well, there's a lot of things that do that. So I challenge people when they say, well, music's about teamwork. So is basketball. And I would argue that basketball is probably more about teamwork than music is about teamwork. So, it's 5 people on a team. It's transitioning. It's a lot of communication. So what are we trying to do with the arts and what are we trying to get out of it? And that's been the struggle that most people are dealing with in programs, is that they look at, well, why does this exist, right? What's the value of a music program in this space? Why does it exist? And this is why a lot of programs get cut, because from the optics of it, many principals or communities will look at the number of people in a program. And the struggle with that is that when the programs go down in participation rates, we don't tend to look at ourselves and say, well, maybe we're not offering the right thing. We tend to blame everything else. Well, kids are busy now, or they have to pay for cell phones, or they want to drive, or they want to do this, or they have other interests, or they're always on. So whatever you want to throw in the bucket, it's always been there, right? But what we don't want to look at as a capitalist market and say, maybe we need to offer something different that the students are interested in. And we have to realize that, especially in the US, our demographics have changed a lot in the last 50 years. And even when you go back 50, 60 years, live music, as far as like concert bands or jazz bands or, the big band era, they were all a real thing and we were exposed to that. That's not the case today. But music programs isolated themselves and it became very much almost a historical preservation idea of where now you have the schools have become this, I don't want to say isolated space, but it's become a limited space of like, that's where you're going to see a concert band. That's where you're going to see a jazz band. Those are where you're going to see those sort of traditional things. But you go to the outside world, and the world of informal music is not that at all. And that's what dominates our. So you have this weird dichotomy of things that are happening, what's taught in school versus what's on the outside. And we can't step in that same river twice. Yeah. So we're not going to be able to go back and say, and there are things that come back, like with like the big band era. You have Michael Bublé or Harry Connick Jr. You have these artists that sort of bring these things back into the space, but you're not going to see this great revival of instrumental music and that time has passed. Yeah. And we don't often want to let that go. We don't use the abacus anymore. We don't use the slide rule. We don't sit at a drafting table with a pencil and deal with stuff. So a lot of times we refuse to move on, and more times than not, it's an emotional response than it is one of a practical response. So it's that struggle that a lot of people deal with in this space of what we should offer. How do we go about that? How do we meet the students' need? We have these changing demographics, but yet we're coming up in a system that's very traditional, and we're going to colleges that are traditional. And then when educators get thrown out into that new world, so to speak, They don't know what to do. They don't know where to go.
Right. And I see it I'm a high school business teacher, so we're always traditionally called the electives, right? Where you elect over here, but we know it can drive everything. So there's a lot of different routes here. So, well, let me ask you this. If you were to build, and maybe it depends on the community, but if you were to build a music program in a school today, right, that doesn't look at that big band kind of traditional 70 years ago, and you're right, it's such a preservation, it's so interesting. What would that look like? What would Ryan's school of music look like? Or would you have to kind of, evaluate the community and the needs? Or where are you at on that?
Well, this is actually one of the things I teach at Montclair State University. I teach instrumental methods, and the first thing that we start with what are the needs? What are the needs of the school? What are the needs of the demographic? Because I approach it like I'm coming in as a blank slate, because you have to realize that every community that you drop into is different. But in higher ed, we train this one size fits all, and that's, if I put on Shaquille O'Neal's shirt, or he tries to put on mine, that's not going to be the one size fits all that works, right? So I try to take a step back and say, if we had to create this slate of new things, or at least have this window of opportunity, what would it be? And I think there's a couple things to look at. What I asked them to do for this class is they come up with a mission statement. What's their mission statement? And we use Dr. Martin Luther King's "I Had a Dream" speech. And we say, this is just, what's your dream of a music program? And then you get down into like, what's your vision, right? Vision statement, then going into the mission statement, like, what are my goals, right? And then working with your administration of saying, like, what's our combined goals of what we're doing? And many times administration, they don't know. They haven't been brought up in music programs, and I'm generalizing, of course, but they don't understand the intricacies. So when you have these kind of things, it becomes difficult. Then you look and say, okay, what is the community? What does this community need? What is the makeup of my community? So I can start driving where we're going, and what do you want to do? And then you have to look at, what is the market? What is the market of valuable skills out there for music? And this is where it gets touchy, right? Because we start dealing with this idea of vocational versus the arts. And I don't think they need to be separated. I think you could look at, yes, you want to have people be lifelong musicians and be creative learners and do all these other things, but you also want them to be able to see a path moving forward. That's not like, hey, I'm going to go for musical theater and I'm going to audition and I'm going to get one of the top Broadway jobs, be one of 1,000 people auditioning in the space. There's this market that's out there. And you take an artist, pick a pop artist like Justin Bieber. Whatever reason he popped in my mind, but you look at Justin Bieber, how many downloads does he get a day? And then compare that to all the other forms of music. So when you look at pop music, it demands 99% of all the music that's consumed right now. And then you have this 1% almost into like other. And of course, we're putting other genres into that. A lot of the country music is pop or pop crossover, but so that's where the market is. And why don't we want to work toward that market and all the things that go into it, instead of saying, oh, well, that's not something I'm going to embrace as an educator. It becomes such a controversial thing because it's a personal thing of saying, like, well, I don't believe in a thing called auto-tune, which helps correct pitch. Every song that comes out is auto-tune to some degree. Every single song. You're listening to that, but the technology is there that also is unbelievable. So when you look at something from the idea of when the early recordings, and you listen to like that one microphone and they recorded the whole band at the same time, no balance, it was live. It was just a live performance that they're recording. Now you look at Dolby Atmos, that's using something like 15 different speakers. Mm-hmm. And you can come up on your phone like it says Dolby Atmos. Well, there's a lot of people that are working on that technology to bring you that better quality and that better musical experience. So there's all these jobs and these pathways into music that necessarily isn't this performance or education side of things. And when you get one performer, whoever that is, they mm-hmm. probably have hundreds of people that support them in some way, shape, or form to do that. So when I look at a music program and how it's balanced, what are the students' needs, where are their interests? And then once you determine that, it's market testing. If you put out a class and no one listens to it or no one takes it, right? Nobody wants to take it. There's a reason for that. And if this was if this was a capitalistic endeavor, and a company puts out 5 products and 2 of them aren't selling, do they keep making them? They get rid of them.
No. Yeah.
And there's people that are emotionally tied to it, but what do they say? It's business. We're here to make money.
Right.
Right. And so when you look at those classes and you're like, well, I offer this class, but nobody wants to take it, then nobody wants to take it. But it becomes this ego thing of well, they should take it and they should do this. And you hear these debates in other areas, and I laugh about them all the time. And one of the ones that comes up, at least in the last maybe 5 years or so, has been cursive. They don't teach cursive in schools anymore. And I'm like, yeah, that's amazing that they're not wasting that time on cursive.
Right.
Well, how are they going to learn how to sign their name? I'm like, that's your biggest concern?
Or write a check. Like, no one's writing checks anymore. I mean,
right. I'm like, that's your biggest concern. I don't learn how to ride a horse.
Mm-hmm.
And I still manage to get around. And eventually driving, like you personally driving, won't be a thing.
Right. Right.
How many will that be? I don't know. But are you going to need to teach driver's ed when you don't need to drive a car? But there becomes this emotional tie-in, and many times music educators, we've held on to this because there's such an emotional bond. People think about their experiences of performing in a choir or a band or the friendships or whatever it is, and it becomes an emotional argument.
Yeah.
And you have to remove emotion out of that. And I'm not sure how far you want to go and how deep you want to go into this, but that was one of the things I was working with the Grammy Music Education Coalition, was looking at the data sets of the entire cities and for Nashville and Philadelphia, and figuring out what students are taking, what kind of students are taking what kind of course, so that way we can apply it in a meaningful way, meaning that we could look at the race of a student, we could look at their ethnicity, we could look at the gender, we could look at the number of years that they're staying in a course, we could look at their Title I, their socioeconomic level, and determine, based on the mock-up of that school, where students are more likely to participate in. And they do it all the time in business world. It's market analysis, right? You build a McDonald's, you're not going to build one right next door. They'll wait 3/4 of a mile, but they're going to put that, they're going to do a market analysis of this, and this is what you're doing. But oftentimes we come in as the educator knows best, and we just offer something, then people aren't taking it, and then we're in this weird spot of trying to defend our position. And a principal looks at it and says, well, there's nobody taking the class, there's nobody interested, I need to offer an art elective, I'll offer graphic design instead. So it becomes this chicken and egg thing that you have to really look at and take a step back. But people, are often reluctant to do that for many reasons.
Yeah, it really is across the board. I think you've described not only just in music, but across the entire board of education. When we get stuck in these pigeonholes of, I like it. It's like kind of a classic look at something, and we're emotionally tied. How do you incentivize that? Because you have to have a pretty good administration from where you're at the post-secondary level to say, hey, you know what, we're going to try this, and there's an agreement there. A lot of schools, including myself, sometimes you get to go through 15 different levels of politics and all this stuff to actually try something. Some administrations are easier to work with than others, but how do you incentivize that? How would you do that? That maybe there's an answer, maybe there isn't. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to a couple things. So, and this is where music has done an unbelievable job, and a lot of my colleagues in higher ed that do much more research than I do on any way. So one is working with the administration of a shared goal. What's their shared goal of doing this? But realizing there are real benefits to creating these music programs, and there are research benefits. And I'll give you sort of an anecdotal story here. One of the programs that we worked with in the city of Philadelphia is we ended up putting a popular music songwriting, composing, beat making program into a high school that had no music program. I believe the high school had something like 74% attendance rate, which is horrible. You're shooting generally in that 95, 96 percentile is what you're going for. So we helped the school choir music teacher. We worked with a local nonprofit called DASH, Destined to Achieve Successful Heights, to put this program in. And within that 1 year, that attendance rate went up 8% for the entire school. And it was a small high school that the school district wanted to get rid of, but the community wanted. And we're seeing this a lot in urban areas. And so when we put this program in, we came in with a fresh start. And we said, okay, what are we going to do here? And we ended up with about a 35% attendance rate or participation rate in that program. And the students that were taking the program, their attendance rate went up 12% because I had that student level of data. I could track that through. That becomes a case study. And when I looked at the district across the board, no matter what music class you're taking, we're raising attendance rates. And it was funny because I dug into the data. We had millions and millions of pieces of data. I dug into it for hours. And I really wanted to prove that like instrumental music, participating band, that was the number one. That was going to get more students in. And I couldn't do it. It was coming down to anything like they were participating in. But it then gives an argument when we start looking at increasing attendance rates, that ties right into state funding.
Right.
Because this is funding based on attendance rates. And so when we can do that, we become an actual a money generator, or at least a get backer, which isn't a real term, but we can get that money back from the state to then start funding these programs. So it becomes a win-win on the principal's side of this because there are that. And of course, you go into the other cognitive benefits. My own dissertation looked at like critical thinking and depth of knowledge skills and how to develop that. And there's all these things that come into that we could then dive into. The interesting thing about data is that I didn't collect any data that the schools didn't have.
Right.
We have a great company called EdUp Metrics that tied right into the School District of Philadelphia's data system. Mm-hmm. Nobody was taking the time to analyze it. And it's not because they're lazy or they're busy. They're busy. They don't have time to analyze on that level. And then it became, I was able to put a case study together that the director of arts then could go, and when they wanted to cut a music teacher, they're like, this is why you shouldn't cut a music teacher, or this is why you should add music teachers. And when you start crunching the numbers, you're not talking about thousands of dollars across a district the size of Philadelphia, which is about 126,000 students. You're talking millions of dollars that are on the table. So that becomes a great benefit to them. So you have these shared sort of goals that you can look out for, and what are those win-wins that you can get into. But these are things that we don't often talk about in education because educators don't come at it from that lens, right? They come at it like, I'm here to teach and this is good and this is, but because of my nonprofit experience and my business experience, you end up looking at it through a different lens that allows you to generate something new. But we also can't be afraid to end things. Sometimes things just need to end, and it doesn't mean when things end, they end forever. You just need to, you rode the wave, you saw the popularity of it, and now it's migrated down. We see this in social media platforms. We see this in artists and artist shelf. We see it all the time, but we hold on to it more than we need to.
You figure, at the end of a professional career or whatever, you see the athletes who are just like not there anymore. I mean, I feel like that's the same way with teaching. It's a great way to put it. And by the way, EdUp Metrics is I have a good buddy who's in that organization. It's a very interesting organization as well. I see the data. Let's jump into that data then. As you said, and we all know as educators, we're super busy. We're trying to, do everything at the same time. Where does that land? Where does the data land? Well, where should it land? Should we put time for educators to do that? Should we work together with administration to do it? I love data. I love looking at those types of data points and such. But again, I think it's just, I mean, you run out of time in the day as a traditional educator, I should say. What would your school look like in that realm? Where how do you put data in the mix? Especially that kind of data, because that's kind of a broader administrative data that you're looking at. A lot of people like me, I would say, well, why isn't somebody else doing this? Which we know that, everybody has so much on their plate. What does that look like for you, where that lands?
Well, I think the first thing that you have to look at is what is your size of district? So when I taught in Pennsylvania, I worked for a small district and I was able to get the data like very quickly and not go through a lot of paperwork. And because I was a teacher there, they were like, great, you can have access to this. And that's part of what I did my dissertation on, was working on that localized data set using the state test scores, right? So that was able to really work on that localized subsets and do that. And yeah, it takes time, but the math isn't complicated. Right? You don't have to get into SPSS, which is an analysis package, or do all these crazy things. You could just come down to some basic goals. When you start looking at larger districts, they might have someone in charge of the data. So if you partner with them or work with them in some way, but you have to make your goals be known. And when I started with the Grammys, their goal was to raise music participation, which is, what does that mean? In what, there's maybe 100 different types of music courses. You're looking at a district that's K through 12 plus PK plus all these other factors that are coming. What does that even mean? So there was a lot of hours and hours and hours just spent just sort of dialing things down, and you find your rabbit hole of, and you go down and you're like, well, that doesn't prove anything. All right, well, what if I looked at this? Or what if, and some things that you think are like assumptions, they just are true. So when you look at certain things, so one of the things I would point out is a district that operates in like a magnet traditional school system. And what I mean by this is like an arts magnet. So you're going there specifically for music, but they're offering traditional ones. Look at your demographic makeup. If you're in an urban environment in the United States, there's pockets that aren't this way, California, Texas, things like that. But you're looking at 50% African American students coming into it. And you look at this arts magnet, and then all of a sudden the participation rate is 10%. And you could look around your school and be like, oh, this is weird. And you realize that most of the white students and Asian American students they're the ones that are into these art magnet schools, because they're taking the concert band, jazz band, orchestra. And that's kind of the stereotypes that you get into, but they're true when you look at the data points. So now if we take a step back as an educator or administrator and say, I just created a school that's creating a segregated environment because of what we're offering. And that's hard for people to like come back and be like, no, it's open to everybody. Yeah, but that's true. But if we're not offering certain products that can, and we hear about this in neighborhoods called gentrification, right? So, and it's very similar to that. And you're not making those choices or those things that are gonna have everyone participate. But if your district is 50% African American students, and then you're offering to a subset of that, and then it's going to be, then you look at your Title I students, you're like, we're not getting many Title I kids here. Well, what's the challenge with the socioeconomic status that's coming in? And realizing that we created a filtering system for what students are going to take, right? We're going to, we're filtering out this, the majority of it, we're filtering out this group, but that's not our intent. But it's our impact that we're making. So when I look at this, so it depends on the district size for me, and then coming into it. And then if I didn't have any bandwidth to do this, I would try to bring in another party. What's your other group that may be working with us? Like, for example, Ingenuity works in Chicago, right? They analyze data and they work with these data sets. Where are my university partners? Is there a university partner that's willing to take this on and help do a case study or a journal write-up? People that work in that space are always looking for more content. And if you went to them and said, listen, I'm starting this new program here. This is what I want to analyze. Can you help me do this and build this in? It becomes this win-win where you can't really do the data analysis and you can't do the work, but you can bring somebody else in to sort of help with that. But then again, it's not complicated work. That most of it is basic stats that you're working with across the board. It's not like I'm looking at it and trying to figure out, all these complicated variance and analysis and things like that. It's very simple data, and very simple data speaks the loudest.
So what's next for you, and then how can people connect with you? Obviously, you are, for me knowing you, I know that you know so many different levels of just music education, adding the data, and you've done some incredible things. How can my listeners connect with you and say what's next? What are you interested in working on next?
So I've worked at Montclair State University. I was a director of extension programs for this last year, and I also taught classes at the university level. And I love teaching. I love doing that. And what I tell people is I try to find things at this point in my career that I just love to do. And it's funny when you connect with employers or whatever, they're always, well, what's your salary level? What do you need to? And I'm like, I just want to love what I'm doing. If I can love it, like it's not a number. Like people, like I don't go into things chasing for numbers because it's weird to me. I'd rather love what I do and have a passion behind that and be challenged by something. It's kind of like when I was working with Saudi Arabia doing that. And that was a huge challenge, because they're starting off music from nowhere, right? And you're bringing in this, and you're trying to guide them and be the bumper rails on the bowling alley of like, you're trying, and they're trying to do everything at once and trying to focus on that. So I love those sort of challenges that speak across the world. So I don't necessarily have a particular area that I plan on going into next, I love working with data. I love working with the arts. I love teaching. I love doing all that kind of stuff. But I'm trying to find an organization I think that I connect with on a lot of levels. Because you'd be surprised, Peter, that I've talked to many groups, many nonprofits, and whether it's consulting or doing other work, and some people just don't want to grow. They don't want to grow, and they don't want to see that out there. They want to keep doing the same thing, but they expect different results.
Yeah.
And so they look at what they're doing and say, our student numbers are down. And I'm like, of course they are. And it's hard for them because they want to step back and they think it's something that they're doing, or they're going to start this and be able to create. And it's not. It's just the world has changed and you just haven't changed with that. But with that said, I think the best way to probably connect with me is my email, which is Ryan, RYAN Zellner, ZELLNER 98 @gmail.com. I'm also at YouTube. It's just Ryan Zellner. I do a trumpet channel and some fun stuff there. That all started because I started teaching by Zoom for COVID, right? And then I had this epiphany of, well, not an epiphany, that seems more striking than it is. I remembered back to that early question you asked me, Peter, about being a good student or not good student. I was like, I never took any notes in college. So when I had to come back to my methods courses, I was just going off of memory and then like talking to people, right? So I ended up creating this channel on YouTube just to be able to have the students connect with the material that I taught them in class. Because, we would teach by Zoom and I created a bunch of stuff. And then I was like, wow, I need something that's because they don't know where they're going to end up. They may be brass, they may not, who knows, right? But now they can go back to these videos and these series of videos and just simply lay it out that way. And I'm in the process of creating one for my instrumental methods class and having that go through in snippets and basically condensing that lecture to be that way. So that was exciting and like fun. Sort of adventure to be able to do that. But I realized that was a huge thing of where did the pandemic offer us time to rethink our teaching.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad for that because I restructured that whole class to be, we did face-to-face and then face-to-face via, the internet. And then I taught each of the students a 15-minute lesson every week. Yeah. And 15-minute lesson, because most of them are beginners, for those, 25, 30 students I had, here are the common problems. And then I can make a list of common problems, and I made videos to address all of those common problems to be able to get around that. So that's been exciting as well to be able to do that.
Well, I think that's amazing because we've crossed paths as we're both, ambassadors for the Spikeview program. It's pretty cool there where, we're building portfolios. But I love the fact that, we all realized there was a place in COVID to really just kind of restructure and play, right? It was almost a sandbox opened up and we're like, okay, well, this is different. And it forced everybody to change. Somebody wise to me in teaching told me, you can teach for 30 years and teach the same thing over and over again, or you can grow along with the students. And I feel like you are, I know you're definitely a person who's going to constantly grow and to build newer programs as they come about with who knows what the future is going to bring. But I want to thank you for sharing your story here, Ryan. We'll put your connections up down below, but appreciate you telling your story.
Of course, love it. And if you want to do that series, I'm all up for it. We can dive into a lot of different things. So.
We may look into that. Let me see what my schedule looks like. And for everybody else, thank you so much for listening today on Disrupt Education. We'll catch you next time.